So now we're talking about the S, of the D, the I, the S, and the C. We're talking about the S trait and characteristics. So let's look at your handout and follow along. We're going to talk about some of the descriptors for the high S persons. People who have, this is their primary style. They're a high, what we call a high S style. What are some of their traits and characteristics that help you identify who they are and what you can expect from that type and style of behavior? So let's look at some of the descriptors. One of the descriptors that we would talk about were high S's, or the high S's are really strong team players. These are style of people who really like to work with others. They work well on a team. They are harmonizing very well as a group. They are very good at working together and cooperatively. So we call them team players. Another characteristic of a high S person is that they are very loyal. When you organizations are that have the people in the organization that are high S's, these are people who generally will stay with you a long time. One of the reasons they do that is because they don't like a lot of change. They get very comfortable in what they're doing. They like to do things where there's a known or predictability about what they do. And they get it down fine, they fine-tune it, and then they like to run with it. And they don't like it to change. There was some books that were written sometime back, said something about if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, that was written by a high S person. They don't want to change. Then somebody else later out came out and said, if it ain't broke, break it. That's a high D. So there's just a difference in the way you approach it. So strong team players, they're very steady. They are good with loyalty. They stay within the organization. They don't transfer around a lot. And then they're also very good listeners. Remember we talked earlier in our communication about how important listening is. And of all the styles that has a trait and characteristic of being good listeners, the high S people are good listeners. In fact, a lot of high S people migrate to occupations and positions where that's a strong needed asset for them. For instance, counselors or customer service people or people who deal with people but need somebody there that can build relationships by listening. And generally, high S people are very good listeners. They're also very sincere. I have a daughter, and my daughter is a high S person, and she's mentioned to me several times over the course of the years. Now she's grown and has her own family, but she's mentioned to me how she'll go places or be in a social group, and people will come up to her and just start telling her their most intimate secrets. And she says, I can't believe these people. They don't know me from up. And yet they come and they start talking to me about all these personal things. He said, what have I got, a badge? What have I got, a message here or something? I said, I don't know why they do that. And I think the reason is because she emanates that sincerity. High S people have a tendency and a characteristic and a trait of being able to not only be good listeners, but people know that they care about them by the way they listen and their sincerity. So that's a very positive trait that they have. Another trait that high S people have is that they're possessive. Now, when I say that, people sometimes become offended, especially high S people. But I don't mean they're possessive of things. They're generally possessive of information. High S people don't volunteer a lot of information. Therefore, when you're in a group or in a team meeting or a group meeting and you have discussions and so forth, generally it's not your high S people who are going to volunteer information. They've got a lot of good information. And so one of the things we need to understand about differences in style is that we have to draw those people out. So high S people have a lot of good information, but what we have to do is we have to ask them for it. They don't volunteer it. They don't mind giving it to you, by the way. They're not possessive from the point of view they want to hold it. They just don't volunteer it. So being aware of who you're dealing with and who you're talking to and what style they are makes a big difference as to how well you can utilize those people's assets. So high S people, you know that you're going to have to spend some time with them and pull out information from them. They don't mind giving it to you, but you're going to have to ask them for it. So again, another good reason that it is to understand the differences in the styles and the differences in the way people go about things. Again, you can begin to see why there can be conflicts in organizations. Where you have a person who doesn't volunteer a lot of information, and then you've got a boss or a supervisor or so forth that is a high verbal person and expects all kinds of information to come forth. They don't understand why people aren't sharing with them. And a lot of times it's because there's a different style, and you have to go about getting that information in a little different manner. So those are some of the traits and characteristics of a high S person. Let's take a look at a couple of famous people that you know, that you could recognize that are high S people. One of them would be a lady that spent her life helping other people in India, and that would be Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa was a great example of a high S person. Very loyal, very sincere, tremendous listener, caring person. She would be a poster child for a high S person. That's a good image of that type of traits and characteristics. Another one might be former President Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was a high S person, and is a high S person. He ran the government and the operation and administration from an S point of view. Some people didn't agree with that or weren't really complimentary, but that was part of his style, was being one of participation and being involved and a participant. High S trait and characteristic. Another one might be former First Lady Laura Bush. Laura Bush didn't marry another S. Obviously, George is not an S, but she was a high S person. Really kind of a harmonizer for him. And in the White House, the kind of job that she did in the White House, people on both sides of the political environment would consider her a very good First Lady and a very good diplomat, which she was when she was there. So high S people are very valuable in our organization. They also are people-oriented, but they're not gregarious per se. So they're different from the high I's. The high S's are less gregarious, but they're still people-oriented. And one of the traits that you'll find with high S people is they generally have a servant's heart. They love to serve, they love to help, and they love to be involved in teams. So let's look at some of the things that energizes a high S. If we look at our part C there in our handout, we can see that high S people, they like harmony. They like to work in an environment where there's not a lot of conflict. We're talking about conflict management. Well, if you've got a culture where there's a lot of conflict, high S people will not do well. They probably won't leave. They'll just take it, but they won't be productive. Because of the conflict and because of the disruptions and their feelings, they won't produce like they would have the capability of doing in a harmonious environment. So high S people, they like harmony, they like working together, they like people getting along well together. We've already mentioned that they're high, they have a high loyalty, they like teams. They also like closure. High S people like to have things put together, lined out, so that there's some structure and there's some sequence to what they like to do, and they know that there's a great pattern there. They don't like a lot of unknowns. If you were to give an assignment, a manager comes to a high S person and a high D person, and they say, okay, here's your assignment. I want you to investigate the opportunity for us to move into this particular product, look at the market demand, gather the information on the pricing, and all the details that we need to decide if we want to move into that market. And I want you to take this part of the geographics, and I want the other person, I want you to take this part of the geographics. Well, same instructions to both styles, different response. The high D person, they say, great, I'm on my way, I'm out of here, and they're gone. The high S person is going to be thinking, well, wait a minute. What area do you want me to work in? What do you want me to do in terms of reporting? How do you want me to put this information together? They've got 1,000 questions about how do you get there. Not that they don't take initiative, but they need more instructions and more information so that they can go do the job we've asked them to do. So in terms of managing and working with people of different styles, you have to know how much and what ways to work with each of the different styles. S is being particularly one that needs some detail. They need to know what some of the details are. Okay, if you look down here, areas of improvement, we talked about being a little bit possessive of information. You need to draw them out. Sometimes they're so low risk takers that they don't try things. High S people get comfortable. They like to do it one way. They want to stay doing it that way. So in our organizations, and I've seen many organizations who are moving ahead or trying to develop a new product or a new market system, and they are going to roll something out to make these changes. Well, with your people in your organization who are high S styles, you need to give them a lot of advance notice. We're not going to do this next week. We're going to give them advanced information so that they can process it. They can get themselves emotionally ready to make that changes, to ask the questions that they need to so that they don't feel conflicted on the inside. So dealing with difference in styles. They may resist change. In a lot of cases, you have to show them why to change, what it's going to be, why it's going to be good, and give them some detail. Now you can see that the S's are a little different than the D's and the I's, which are much more change-oriented than the S's and the C's. And we'll talk about the C's in just a minute. So if we look down a little further, how do you communicate with a high S person? One of the things is we've talked about you have to draw out their opinions because they're not going to volunteer them. You need to give them logical approaches. What is the sequence and how we're going to do things, and kind of map it out rather than just give them the ball and say, go get it. You need to give them much more kind of details and instructions. One of the things you need to do is clarify and define the areas that they're working in. One of the things that happens to me when I go in and work with different companies, the first thing that the high C's say to me as we go in and I begin working with them is that, one of the things we need around here are good job descriptions. Why? Well, because they want to know the details. They want to know what they're responsible for. They want to see it in black and white, and so forth and so on. So, I don't argue with them about that, but I think it's always interesting that the first one to bring those up are the high S people. Involve them in the planning process. They don't like to be so much told what to do, but they like to be a participant involving in the planning. So involve high S's in the planning process. Now, you're not going to get a lot of quick decisions when you do that, but you do need them involved so that they can buy into the situation. In many organizations where I've come in and worked with an organization, in order for me to work with them, I would often have them let me work with their management team, a lot of which were S's and I's and C's and so forth, but they could see some of the things that we do so that we become more familiar with me and with our approach and compatibility so that the organization could move forward in the project that we were bringing, rather than just work with the CEO and him tell them or her tell them that here's what we're going to do. So it was a process of really orienting and getting them comfortable with what we're coming up next. S's are very needy in that particular area. Down at the bottom, we're talking about stress. How do you relieve stress? They get stressed, especially in conflict. We're talking about conflict resolution. If there's a lot of conflict, it builds up a lot of stresses with high S people. One of the things that helps them to relax is they need downtime. S's need downtime. One of the things that they've told me is their favorite is taking hot baths, or saunas or various kinds of things to relax. Is a way that a lot of high S's like to kind of decompress. The emotion, what kind of emotions? High S's. Remember we talked about the C's were anger and the high I was optimism. Well, the high S's, their emotion is more stoic. They've got emotions, but they don't show it to you very much. We've all had the situation where you're talking to somebody and you're visiting with them and you're giving some information and so forth, and they've got this look on their face that you're wondering, are they in there? Is somebody home? because you can't tell by the expression on their face. High S's are that way. Now, they're in there, and they know what you're saying, and they're processing it. But they don't show you on the outside what they're thinking on the inside. So they're more stoic with their emotions. They have emotions, but they just don't show it often. So, keep that in mind as you're dealing with people. If you find a person like that, you can begin to surmise that, well, I'm dealing with a high S person here. Percentage of the population. Again, we're still in the 20s, but a little lower than the D's and the I's. High S's are around 23% of our population are high S's. So that brings us to the end of our chapter 8. So be sure you do your download, complete your worksheet that we've talked about, and then we'll be ready for chapter 9, talking about high C's.